Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned your subscription. What I'm going to be talking about today is truss rod placement. And this really stems from a question that a viewer asked regarding the placement of a truss rod adjustment nut, specifically at the headstock end. Should it be placed in front of, underneath, or behind the nut? Well, to be honest with you, I've never really given it too much thought, except to say that I like to position the nut where I can access it easily with whatever tool that I'm using to adjust the truss rod. I want to make sure that not only can I get the tool to the nut, but I want to make sure I have enough room in order to move the truss rod nut in a range of motion that's actually going to accomplish something. Oftentimes we may forget that little detail and you'll end up with a finished neck and you can't get to the truss rod nut, or there's just not enough movement without damaging the wood that surrounds the truss rod nut. So really, that for me has always been the main factor, is access to the nut with the tool that's going to be used. Really what I think is more important is placement of the truss rod itself in the neck. Obviously, you want it placed where it's going to do the most good. And that can be a little bit difficult to determine, or it can take experience of having made a lot of necks to know exactly where the best place to place the truss rod is. Well, I'm going to try to help you to reduce that time it takes to figure that out by explaining sort of how I've come to the conclusion of where to place the truss rod. And to understand where to place it, you have to understand how the truss rod works and what it's doing. So basically what the truss rod does is it counteracts string tension. When you string up a guitar and tune it, the strings tighten and that pulls on the headstock. And what that can do is it can cause the nut end of the neck to rise up. So it creates a kind of a bow effect. And that lifts the strings up off the frets. And in many cases, it creates string action that's way too high to be comfortable to play. So you can adjust the truss rod, which it effectively will bow the truss rod, typically in this direction, sort of like a hill. And what that does is it brings that headstock, the nut end of the neck, back down to where it's more level. And that in turn brings the strings back down to where the action is playable. We also use the truss rod to control the amount of relief on a neck. Sometimes guitar players like to have a little bit of relief, so we can use the truss rod in conjunction with string tension to introduce and control a little bit of relief in the fretboard. Some guitar builders and players like to use the truss rod in order to eliminate string buzz. And in most cases, that's not what you want to use a truss rod for. There are other ways to fix string buzz that are more appropriate. However, there is one situation where using the truss rod to eliminate string buzz is necessary. And that is when you're about to walk out on stage and you've just picked up your guitar, and as you play it, you notice you've got a lot of string buzz. You can make a quick adjustment to the truss rod to temporarily eliminate that string buzz until you can get it into a shop with a luthier who knows how to correctly fix the string buzz. And that's usually either by leveling the frets or a whole new fret job. So let me explain some of the thoughts that I have with regard to placing the truss rod so that it's going to do the most good. Now, to explain this, I'm using an old junker guitar that I have sitting around my shop. But basically, when you string up a guitar and tune it, the strings, as I mentioned before, are going to pull up on the headstock. and that's going to create that slight up bow. And what we're trying to do with the truss rod is correct that and bring that nut down. So the placement of the truss rod becomes really important as to maximizing the truss rod's function in order to bring the neck down. Now when you look at the neck, you'll notice that it tapers from the heel to the nut, both on the sides as well as along the back. So obviously at this end, the wood is much thinner and is therefore more susceptible to getting bent under string tension. Back here at the heel, where the neck is mounted into the body, and it doesn't matter whether it's a bolt-in or a set-in, the neck is not going to bow from the heel, the very end of the heel, up to probably about, I'd say around the 17th fret. That whole area, maybe even further beyond, this whole area is going to stay pretty level because it's supported just by the virtue of the fact that it's mounted into the body. But past this area towards the nut, it's going to start to bow. So what we want to do is we want to try to bring that down. Well, if you're placing the truss rod with the nut, adjustment nut at the headstock end, the end of the truss rod is going to be pretty close to the nut. And this is in the, like I said, the thinnest and weakest area. So in most cases, you're going to be pretty safe to install it this way, because when you adjust it, back here at the heel, where, as you can see, the truss rod stops well short of the heel, it doesn't matter because this part isn't going to bow, but this part is. So by inducing bow here, we can effectively lower that nut and get the neck back to being fairly close to level again. If, on the other hand, let's say I wanted to put the truss rod adjustment nut at the heel, like you see here, as you can see, the truss rod stops well short of the nut. And in some cases, depending on the particular truss rod you're using, it could end up quite a bit shorter. That can be a real problem, because what you're going to do is you're going to remove the bow from this part, but it's not going to affect this. So what you end up with is an S-curve. And that can be a real problem when it comes to trying to eliminate string buzz as you're adjusting the truss rod. It can be a real nightmare to do that. So if you're going to position the adjustment nut at the heel, you want to make sure that your truss rod is going to be long enough to extend all the way to under the nut in this narrowest part. In fact, when I'm installing the truss rod nut at the headstock, I usually will position the nut beyond the the guitar nut itself, so that I have the actual truss rod portion of the rod starting right underneath the guitar nut. And then that way I can be assured that when I adjust it, I'm getting maximum adjustability right in this area, and it's going to pull the headstock back down. I don't have to worry so much about this area back here because, like I said, it's supported by the body, the wood is the thickest, and it's not going to be as impacted by string tension as the nut is. So long story short, you want to make sure that your truss rod is going to be able to affect adjustment closer to the nut than to the heel. That's where most of the bending is occurring. So as long as you can position the truss rod to do that, you should be okay. And if you have to install the nut at the heel, you just want to make sure that the truss rod is long enough to where the end of it is actually beginning underneath the guitar nut. Okay, well, I hope that makes sense. It's really pretty simple. And truss rod placement, it's not one of those things that you necessarily want to overthink, because folks will overthink it. And as long as you've got the adjustability of the truss rod close to the nut, you're going to be in good shape. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, again, welcome, and I hope that I've earned your subscription. And as always, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back.